President Trump just commuted the sentence of George Santos. He's the disgraced Republican who admitted to lying about where he had worked and where he had went to school. Well, this was just a commutation and not a pardon, but it reminded me of another politician that Trump actually did pardon earlier this year, and I was the reporter inside the courtroom for her federal trial from gavel to gavel. My name is Jaewon, and I'm a reporter based in Houston, Texas. Today, I'm going to talk about the Michele Fiore federal fraud case. Michele Fiore has been dubbed Lady Trump.
Washington Post called me a gun-toting calendar girl.
She's been a state assemblywoman, a Las Vegas city councilwoman, and a county judge, which, by the way, she does not have a law degree. To talk about her case, you really have to go back to June of 2014 when something really tragic had occurred in Las Vegas. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police officers Alan Beck and Igor Saldo were eating lunch at a pizza restaurant when a man and a woman approached them and shot them in ambush style. Those two people then stole the weapons from the officers that they had just shot, went to a nearby Walmart, and killed an innocent civilian. Responding officers followed the two inside the Walmart and exchanged gunfire. A responding officer shot the man, and the woman committed suicide. So in the years following this horrific tragedy, there was a lot of effort in the Las Vegas community to remember and memorialize these two officers, and that included a memorial park for both of these officers. And at the groundbreaking of the Alan Beck Memorial Park, Michele Fiore had proposed that a statue of Officer Alan Beck be placed at the park's entrance.
Councilwoman Fiore broke the news that a statue of both slain officers will be featured at the park, just to give it that extra special touch.
And in an interview with Las Vegas City TV, Fiore said her team was in the process of building a statue for both Officer Alan Beck and Officer Igor Saldo.
One thing that came about that morning is besides the groundbreaking of the park, we're going to get bronze statues of these guys, life size of them.
In February of 2020, the Alan Beck Memorial Park had officially opened to the public, and the statue was there, so there are no problems, right? Well, here's what the US government said actually happened. They claim Fiore created a fake charity and was using her political action committee to solicit donations for these statues, but they say she used that money for her personal things like rent, her daughter's wedding, and even plastic surgery. According to the government, it was actually a private real estate company that had paid for the entirety of the statue, and that came out during trial, which we'll get to in just a minute. But first, let's talk about Michele Fiore's indictment. Michele Fiore was indicted on wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud charges in July of 2024, but she, of course, denied all allegations.
This indictment is a direct attack on my character.
Fiore invoked her right to a speedy trial, and her trial began in September of 2024, just a few months after her indictment. So one of the witnesses the government decides to bring to the stand is Nevada's governor, Joe Lombardo, who had apparently donated to Fiore's PAC. So for some context, the governor of Nevada was also the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department sheriff, and he was the sheriff at the time that Fiore was a city councilwoman. So he told the jury that he donated thinking that the money would, of course, be used to build the statue, and that he felt that he was a victim in this situation. And the governor wasn't the only notable donor that the US government decided to bring to the stand in Michele Fiore's trial. There were also prominent attorneys and real estate investors in Las Vegas. A key witness federal prosecutors also decided to bring to the stand was the executive vice president of a real estate company called Olympia, and that's because the executive vice president of Olympia testified on the stand that he paid for the entirety of the Alan Beck Memorial statue. He did say there were conversations in the beginning about whether Olympia would pay for half of the statue and Fiore's team would pay for the other half, but he said at the end, Olympia paid for the entirety of the statue. So federal prosecutors had really laid out a paper trail of evidence at this point, but I want to talk about a turning point in this trial, and that's when Michele Fiore's daughter, Sheena Siegel, testified on the stand. So the government says that Siegel is a co-conspirator in Michele Fiore's fraud case, but they had an immunity agreement with her during the grand jury proceeding when it came to campaign finance misuse. So Siegel was a witness during the grand jury hearing, and in the condition that she told the truth, she would not be prosecuted by the government. But here's what happened during trial when Siegel was on the stand. A federal prosecutor asked about a check that was written from her mother's PAC to her personal account. Siegel admits that she could have written that check to herself. The federal prosecutor asked if she just incriminated herself on the stand. Fiore's attorney erupts in objection, and the judge had to appoint an attorney for Siegel for the rest of trial. Siegel decided to plead the fifth for the rest of the time on the stand. So the government said what Siegel testified on the stand was different from what she had testified during the grand jury proceeding, so the immunity deal was off. And the judge ultimately struck Siegel's testimony off the record. That means the jury could not consider Siegel's testimony at all during deliberation. But the jury couldn't unsee what they had just witnessed. And sitting in the courtroom, I can tell you, it was clear from the looks of the jurors, they were very confused. On October 3rd, jurors heard closing arguments and began deliberations. In less than 2 hours, the jury had a verdict: guilty on 7 charges of wire fraud and conspiracy. I was the only reporter who spoke with a juror after the trial, and I asked how they came to a verdict so quickly, and to my surprise, their first vote was actually not unanimous, but they said after looking through all of the paper trail, it was evident that Michele Fiore was guilty.
It was pretty obvious. And ultimately, we decided unanimously that there just wasn't anything that rose to the level of reasonable doubt.
So Fiore was originally scheduled to be sentenced in January of 2025. It got delayed, and then she was supposed to be sentenced in May. But then President Trump had announced in April that she had been pardoned. Looking back at this case, I can't help but to think about officers Alan Beck and Igor Saldo and their families, and how upset they must be that the officers' sacrifice became tangled in politics and deceit. Was it her loyalty to the president or the power of protecting its own? I'm Jaewon Jung, and thanks for watching.